began before sunrise, sirens muted, radios whispering. Streets that usually echoed with the distant growl of engines fell silent. Then, with one command, Bakersfield erupted. Flash grenades cracked the dawn, armored trucks sealed intersections, and more than 150 officers moved like clockwork through the city's underbelly. By 6:15 a.m., the Bakersfield chapter of the Hells Angels, once kings of California's Central Valley, was history. But was this victory, or the spark of something bigger? The raids unfolded with military precision. 8 simultaneous operations led by the Kern County Sheriff's Office, backed by the ATF and California Highway Patrol. Helicopters hovered low over suburban rooftops as tactical teams breached clubhouses and garages. Inside, officers uncovered a disturbing arsenal: 25 firearms, high-capacity magazines, thousands of rounds, and something more symbolic: rows of leather vests adorned with the flaming skull emblem, badges of power that had ruled highways and terrified towns for decades. Officials called it Operation Devil's Run. According to Reuters, the plan had been in motion for over 6 months, involving undercover agents who traced gun shipments and money trails reaching into Nevada and Arizona. BBC News confirmed that the Bakersfield cell was one of the last major biker strongholds in California, not yet dismantled after a nationwide crackdown that began in 2022 under new federal anti-gang mandates. The sweep was more than a local operation. It was a statement of federal reach, a flex of domestic authority under President Donald Trump's administration. Yet behind the tactical victory, there was unease. DW's analysis described the Hells Angels as a mirror of rebellion and decay, symbols of freedom turned into shadows of organized power. The group's decline, experts warned, might not mean the end of America's outlaw culture. Defense News compared the operation's scale to counter-terror raids seen overseas, emphasizing the rise of paramilitary-style policing within U.S. borders. The United States, while leading global campaigns against terrorism and cartel violence, now appeared to be waging a quieter internal war. The echoes stretch far beyond Bakersfield. As America clamps down on organized domestic groups, Ukraine battles to reclaim its cities, Israel trades drone strikes with Iran, and the US-China rivalry intensifies over control of the Pacific. Each conflict revolves around one truth: control over chaos. Whether it's a nation or a biker gang, power resists being dismantled. For the residents of California's Central Valley, that morning marked both relief and reflection. Some watched through curtains as armored vehicles rolled past their driveways. Others feared retaliation from remnants of the biker network. For many, it reignited the old American question: how much force is too much to keep the peace? In the end, the sun rose over a city transformed. Quieter, safer, but uncertain. The sound of roaring engines had faded, replaced by the thrum of helicopters and the whisper of suspicion. America had claimed a victory, but in a land built on rebellion, how long before the next outlaws rise again? At 5:42 a.m., the command came through a secure line: execute all targets. Within seconds, Bakersfield became the center of one of California's largest coordinated law enforcement operations in over a decade. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Every squad knew its role, every door its moment. What appeared to the public as an eruption of flashing lights and battering rams was, in truth, the culmination of meticulous planning, digital surveillance, and intelligence sharing across multiple federal and state agencies. The Kern County Sheriff's Office led the front lines, with ATF tactical units securing outer perimeters. The California Highway Patrol managed traffic lockdowns, while FBI cyber teams monitored communications. According to The Guardian, the operation had been modeled on federal anti-gang frameworks used in counter-cartel efforts in Texas and New Mexico. It marked a new era of law enforcement synergy, local grit merged with national strategy. ATF reports confirmed that agents had infiltrated biker gatherings months earlier, posing as mechanics and suppliers. Using encrypted tracking devices hidden within custom Harley-Davidsons, investigators followed the gang's routes, linking them to arms deals in Fresno and narcotics shipments along Interstate 5. The precision was surgical. They treated this like dismantling a military cell, one senior official told Reuters. Every garage, every safe house, every drop point was mapped. The tactical sequence began with simultaneous strikes at 8 locations. Drones equipped with thermal imaging hovered silently overhead. Ground teams advanced using armored Bearcat vehicles, tools typically reserved for counter-terrorism raids. In one suburban cul-de-sac, agents breached a fortified steel gate using thermite charges. The sight stunned neighbors. One described it to BBC News as something out of a movie, but too real to forget. As law enforcement poured into the Hells Angels clubhouse, they encountered more than just weapons. There were cash bundles wrapped in rubber bands, burner phones, and ledgers coated with initials and symbols. A flag bearing the gang's death head insignia hung over a bar lined with whiskey bottles. But the real treasure lay behind a false wall. Tactical maps, payment records, and a list of names. Potentially the next targets in an ongoing criminal network that extended beyond California. According to DW, this wasn't merely about one gang. It was about restoring federal dominance in a state where local authorities had long struggled against deep-rooted outlaw networks. Under President Trump's renewed Law and Order directive, joint operations between state and federal agencies received unprecedented funding and technological backing. Critics from Al Jazeera questioned whether such militarized methods blurred the line between policing and warfare, warning that the spectacle of overwhelming force could alienate communities rather than protect them. Still, for many officers, this was personal. Some had lost colleagues to biker ambushes in years past. Others saw the raid as justice delayed but not denied. When the command center finally confirmed all targets secured, minimal resistance. Applause broke the tension inside the mobile control trailer. The Bakersfield raid will likely be studied for years as a model of precision law enforcement. Yet, it also set a precedent. America's internal security machine, once focused outward on global threats, was now turning inward, applying battlefield logic to domestic crime. The question lingers in every debriefing room. When justice is delivered with the tools of war, how long before the battlefield itself moves home? When the smoke cleared, Bakersfield's quiet neighborhoods became the backdrop to a different kind of reckoning. One by one, the names of the arrested men filtered through law enforcement channels. Ricardo Alvarez, Armando Villaseñor, Joseph Soto Sr., Joseph Soto Jr., Joshua Zavala, John Seeger, and Joshua Vaughn. Each had a history, a reputation, and a role inside a brotherhood that blurred the line between loyalty and lawlessness. These weren't faceless criminals. They were the living symbols of a subculture that had once roared down California's highways as self-proclaimed kings of freedom. Ricardo Alvarez, 42, was described by Reuters as a regional enforcer, known for collecting debts and resolving disputes with ruthless efficiency. Armando Villaseñor, 55, a founding member of the Bakersfield chapter, allegedly oversaw operations that extended from Central California to the Mojave. The Soto family, father and son, ran logistics, handling stolen parts and drug shipments disguised as auto trade supplies. According to BBC News, these networks stretch beyond state lines, linking with subgroups in Arizona and Nevada. Joshua Vaughn and John Seeger belonged to a feeder club called the Sons of Hell. On paper, it was a separate motorcycle group. In reality, it was a recruitment channel, a proving ground where new blood learned the rules of the outlaw code before earning their coveted patch. It was like the military, one undercover agent told The Guardian. Hierarchy, ranks, initiation, and a brutal sense of brotherhood. Their crimes reflected this internal discipline. Prosecutors listed kidnapping, armed robbery, conspiracy, and witness intimidation among the charges, offenses rooted not just in greed, but in control. For years, the Bakersfield chapter had imposed a reign of fear on the highways, using intimidation to silence witnesses and local businesses. One retired Kern County deputy, quoted in DW, compared them to a parallel government, where disputes were settled not in courtrooms, but in back rooms, with threats and violence. The fall of the Hells Angels in Bakersfield wasn't just a criminal case. It was the unmasking of an American myth. Once idolized in movies and music as symbols of unrestrained freedom, the Angels had evolved into something far darker. Al Jazeera described it as a rebellion that turned inward, where independence from authority devolved into organized anarchy. In today's polarized America, that transformation mirrors a larger crisis. Across the globe, groups that once began as movements of identity and pride have hardened into militarized networks, whether separatists in eastern Ukraine, ideological militias in the Middle East, or digital collectives operating in cyberspace. Each claims a kind of freedom. Each enforces it with violence. Analysts at Defense News argue that such organizations thrive where governance falters, where people feel unseen, unheard, or trapped. The Hells Angels, in their earliest days, were veterans, drifters, and outcasts of post-war America. Their modern successors inherited the leather and the legend, but none of the purpose. What remained was a hierarchy built on intimidation and the illusion of belonging. As the suspects were led into custody, handcuffed, silent, and stripped of their colors, an era ended. The cameras captured more than an arrest. They captured a cultural reckoning. And yet, as one Guardian analyst warned, where rebellion once stood, resentment now grows. In the shadow of the Bakersfield bust, the question persists. When rebellion becomes organized crime and order turns militarized, who truly defines freedom? Inside the Kern County Evidence Facility, the story of the Hells Angels' fall lay not in the headlines, but in the silence of an air-conditioned room. Rows of evidence bags lined the tables, weapons tagged, jackets folded, ledgers sealed in plastic. Each artifact was a fragment of a story that stretched across decades of American rebellion and retribution. The first table displayed an arsenal more fitting for a war zone than a biker clubhouse. Assault rifles, many illegally modified, sat beside custom handguns engraved with flames and skulls. According to Reuters, investigators also seized ammunition cases marked with foreign serial numbers, suggesting links to international arms trafficking networks. A bulletproof vest bearing the word enforcer lay next to brass knuckles and a blood-stained bandana, grim reminders of the violence that had sustained the club's power. But the most telling objects were not the weapons. On a separate rack hung 15 leather jackets, patched, faded, and worn from years on the road. Each bore the flaming skull of the Hells Angels, but stitched beneath were names of California cities, secret insignias, and coded abbreviations. BBC News reported that federal analysts believed these patches functioned as territorial markers, each representing a domain of influence within the gang's shadow economy. The symbolism was power itself, a reminder that image can rule as effectively as any gun. Investigators also uncovered a binder filled with handwritten ledgers, entries marked with initials, numbers, and coded transactions. One page, later described by DW, listed payment schedules corresponding to security services, slang for protection rackets extorting local businesses. Another ledger tracked motorcycle sales that masked drug shipments. To the untrained eye, it was a collection of random figures. To federal agents, it was a blueprint of an underground empire. Along the back wall stood a confiscated Harley-Davidson, matte black with a chrome skull on its gas tank. Its engine had been modified to conceal a hidden compartment. Inside, agents found $14,000 in cash and a stack of burner phones. According to The Guardian, the phone numbers traced back to encrypted accounts used by cartel intermediaries operating along the US-Mexico border. What appeared to be a local biker cell now looked like a node in a transnational web, stretching from California's highways to Mexican smuggling routes and even European arms suppliers. This revelation unsettled many in Washington. Under President Donald Trump's administration, the Department of Homeland Security has repeatedly emphasized that domestic gangs could act as conduits for foreign criminal networks. Al Jazeera reported that this Bakersfield bust validated those warnings. The threat is no longer purely foreign. It is hybrid, internal, and adaptive. The parallels abroad are striking. In Ukraine, Russia's Wagner remnants have splintered into mercenary factions, blurring lines between soldier and criminal. In Iran, paramilitary groups tied to ideology have fused into economic cartels. In China, the party's control over underground trade routes mirrors a system of state-sanctioned discipline cloaked in secrecy. Power adapts. It doesn't disappear. For California, that truth is haunting. Every confiscated gun or jacket represents not only the end of a gang, but a reflection of what America fights to contain: freedom without boundaries. loyalty without law. As Defense News concluded, this is not just evidence of crime, it's evidence of identity turned weapon. When the evidence room lights dimmed that night, the chamber stood as a museum of contradictions, freedom and fear displayed side by side. The question remained, had America dismantled a gang or exposed the mirror image of its own obsession with power and control? By midweek, Bakersfield had returned to uneasy calm, but law enforcement analysts warned that beneath the quiet, something was stirring. Across the American Southwest, rival motorcycle clubs and allied cartels were already repositioning. The takedown of one chapter, they said, was never the end. It was the beginning of a chain reaction. Just as the mythical Hydra grew 2 heads for every 1 severed, organized crime has always evolved to fill the void of fallen empires. Reuters cited intelligence briefings suggesting that smaller gangs, such as the Mongols and the Vagos, were moving to claim the lost territory once held by the Hells Angels. In Arizona and Nevada, narcotics routes were being redrawn overnight. Some factions aligned with Mexican cartels were already offering protection services to displaced traffickers. The FBI's Southwest Division described it bluntly: "You don't kill a network by removing one node, you make space for 2 more." The Guardian's analysis framed it as a lesson in power dynamics. Each major criminal organization functions like a decentralized economy, adapting to pressure the way markets respond to regulation. Crackdowns create scarcity, and scarcity fuels innovation. Within days of the Bakersfield arrests, encrypted messages circulated across biker forums, signaling recruitment drives for independent riders seeking new alliances. This is where the parallels to global instability sharpen. In Ukraine, every Russian setback spawns new hybrid militias, some loyal to Moscow, others merely to profit. In the Middle East, the weakening of central authorities gives rise to warlords, private armies, and ideological militias. And in East Asia, DW reports that China's gray networks of smugglers and private contractors mirror the same logic: eliminate competition through state-backed efficiency. In each of these theaters, foreign or domestic, the core struggle remains the same. Power doesn't vanish under force, it migrates. As President Donald Trump's administration pushes its renewed zero-tolerance policy on organized crime, critics warn of a recurring cycle. Al Jazeera quoted one former DEA analyst saying, "Every time we cut off the head of a syndicate, we forget to treat the roots: inequality, disenfranchisement, corruption. Without that, the machine rebuilds." Defense News offered a harsher metaphor. America is fighting a Hydra with a sword meant for dragons. Massive raids demonstrate strength, but risk spreading the threat further underground. And unlike the wars overseas, these battles are fought among citizens, neighbors, mechanics, ex-soldiers, men who once swore allegiance to the same flag. The aftermath is already visible. Along California's highways, independent biker crews once loyal to the Angels now ride unmarked, avoiding colors but keeping weapons close. Police departments across the state remain on alert for retaliatory acts, ambushes, arsons, or intimidation campaigns. This isn't just about crime, BBC News noted. It's about cultural succession, the passing of outlaw heritage from one generation to the next. The broader message is chilling. America's domestic underworld behaves like a living organism, adaptive, resilient, and constantly mutating under pressure. Cut off one cell in Bakersfield and another may rise in Albuquerque, Phoenix, or El Paso. The Hydra lives because it feeds on the same contradictions that define freedom itself: the urge to defy control, even at the edge of law. As the nation celebrates victory, law enforcement veterans whisper a warning familiar from the battlefields of Ukraine and Iraq alike. You can destroy a stronghold, but not the idea behind it. The Bakersfield raid, for all its precision and symbolism, may prove less an ending than an evolution. The question, now more urgent than ever: can America outpace the Hydra it helped create? When dawn broke again over California's Central Valley, the flags outside the Kern County Sheriff's Office fluttered in the same wind that once carried the roar of Hells Angels motorcycles. But beneath the calm, a question lingered. A question about who truly commands power in America, and at what cost that control is maintained. In the words of The Guardian, Bakersfield became a microcosm of a nation at war with its own mythology. The Hells Angels, long seen as the embodiment of rebellion, had been reduced to a case number and a pile of evidence. Yet the state's triumph over them symbolized something larger: the collision between liberty and authority in a nation built on both. Under President Donald Trump's renewed Law and Order initiative, federal coordination between the ATF, DHS, and FBI has reached levels not seen since the post-9/11 counterterrorism surge. Reuters reported that the administration plans to replicate the Bakersfield model across major American cities, from Houston to Detroit, under a campaign dubbed Operation Reclaim. Supporters hail it as a necessary assertion of order in an era of violent extremism and cartel infiltration. Critics, however, warn that America risks transforming its police into soldiers and its cities into occupied zones. This tension mirrors a global reality. In Ukraine, the government's effort to re-establish sovereignty through martial law has drawn both praise and unease. In Israel, aggressive countermeasures against Iranian proxies have blurred the boundaries between defense and dominance. In China, DW notes, surveillance and total control are justified as tools of stability. Each case reflects a shared dilemma. When states fight chaos, how far can they go before they become what they resist? At home, the Bakersfield operation reignited debates on civil liberties. Al Jazeera highlighted concerns from rights groups who question the legality of using drones and armored vehicles in residential neighborhoods. Others pointed to the symbolism: rows of police in tactical armor advancing through quiet American streets, as a mirror of the very militarization the Angels once romanticized. Power, it seemed, had simply changed uniforms. Yet to many Americans, the operation reaffirmed faith in the state's ability to restore safety amid chaos. Residents interviewed by BBC News spoke of relief. For the first time in years, the roads feel ours again. Others were less certain, recalling how fear, once associated with gangs, now lingered in the sight of law enforcement convoys rolling through their towns. Strategically, analysts at Defense News argue that Bakersfield demonstrates the next phase of America's internal defense posture, a fusion of military technology, intelligence networks, and law enforcement doctrine. In Trump's America, this synergy signals both efficiency and danger. The line between war and policing, between enemy and citizen, grows thinner with each successful raid. Globally, the symbolism resonates. As power becomes more centralized, resistance evolves in new forms: digital insurgencies, ideological movements, and underground economies. Whether in Russia's cyberfronts or the cartels of Latin America, control breeds opposition, and opposition justifies more control. The loop is endless. By the time the seized evidence is archived and the court proceedings begin, the story will fade from headlines. But the questions it raises will echo long after. How much freedom must a society surrender to remain safe? And when rebellion is crushed, does security truly win, or merely silence its reflection? The raid in Bakersfield was not just an end to a chapter of crime. It was a mirror held up to America's identity, a test of how far a nation of free men will go to keep its streets in order. Somewhere beyond the sirens and headlines, the engines will roar again. The form may change, but the spirit never dies. And so, America's eternal duel between freedom and control rides on into another dawn. The Bakersfield raid marked one of the most decisive blows against the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in decades. An operation executed with surgical precision that exposed not only a network of organized crime, but the evolving face of American power. Across 6 coordinated raids, federal and state forces dismantled an outlaw empire, uncovering weapons caches, cartel links, and coded ledgers. Yet the operation revealed a paradox. While the US, under President Donald Trump, celebrates a renewed era of law and order, it also edges closer to militarized policing, where the line between domestic safety and state dominance grows faint. Globally, the Bakersfield case reflects a wider truth echoed from Ukraine to the Middle East: the modern struggle between rebellion and control, between those who defy order and those who impose it. As the dust settles, one question remains unanswered. In its quest to conquer chaos, can America preserve the very freedom it was